Dear Father in heaven,
Lieber himmlischer Vater,
we thank you, Lord, that we could now have this class.
wir danken dir, Herr, dass wir jetzt diese Klasse haben
We
können.
invite your presence.
Wir laden deine Gegenwart ein
Would you please give us the daily bread,
und dass du uns unser tägliches Brot gibst,
especially now for this preparation day,
besonders für diesen Rüsttag.
and that you please draw our minds to the mercy seat,
Und dass du unseren Verstand zu diesem Gnadenthron ziehst,
and that we can obtain the blessings we do not deserve,
dass wir diese Segnungen erhalten können, die was wir nicht verdienen,
that come from your pure mercy.
die von deiner reinen Gnade kommen.
And therefore please forgive us our sins
Deswegen, Herr, bitte vergib uns unsere Sünden
and strengthen us now with the food from on high.
und stärke uns jetzt mit der Nahrung von oben.
Please bless Brother Mark as he's leading out.
Bitte segne Bruder Mark, wenn er uns anführt.
Help also Sister Daniela as she translates.
Hilf auch Schwester Daniela, wenn sie übersetzt.
And bless everybody who's present here, either here or via live stream.
Und segne jeden, der hier ist und zuhört und über dem Livestream.
And we ask and pray all these things in Jesus' name.
Und wir bitten das alles in Jesu Namen.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so the Lord changes not, right?
Also der Herr verändert sich ja nicht.
So when we first moved here, we spent much time in the Bible going through the principles and the rules by which we interpret and study the Bible.
Und als wir am Anfang hierher gekommen sind, sind wir viel durch diese Prinzipien und Regeln gegangen, wie wir eben die Bibel studieren sollen.
Okay, and one of the most important things is that we know God, right? It's life eternal that we know Him.
Und eines der wichtigsten Dinge ist ja, dass wir den Herrn kennen. Denn, ja.
Right? Because there's coming a time where you've got to stand before earthly rulers, etc., and you've got to give a witness or a testimony about God. Right?
Denn es wird ja auch eine Zeit kommen, wo wir vor irdischen Königen stehen werden und wir müssen eben ein Zeugnis geben.
And that has to be the God of the Bible, not the God of our own imagination. Right?
Und das muss dann auch der Gott unserer Bibel sein und nicht aus unserer eigenen Vorstellung.
It's the God that changes not.
Es
Right?
ist der Herr, der sich nicht
It's
verändert.
the God that's the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Der dasselbe gestern, heute und für immer ist.
Right? So we have to know that God. Right?
Also wir müssen diesen Gott kennen.
Because when we stand before there, we got to believe those promises from a never changing God, right?
Denn wenn wir dann dort stehen, dann müssen wir die Verheißungen eben kennen und glauben von diesem nicht veränderten Gott.
Right? So, if we don't give a true testimony, the Lord ain't answering our prayers, right?
The Lord.
I said, if we don't give a true testimony, the Lord's
Okay.
not answering our prayers.
Und wenn wir eben nicht dieses wahre Zeugnis geben, dann wird der Herr auch unsere Gebete nicht erhören.
Okay, so we're in a time where something's happened that we didn't understand beforehand, we didn't foresee it coming, right?
Und wir sind in einer Zeit, wo etwas passiert ist, was wir eben nicht im Vorhinein sehen konnten.
Okay, Biden, for instance, this horn, we didn't understand this time period that he would rule for, right?
Zum Beispiel eben Biden, dieses Horn. Wir haben nicht verstanden, dass er in dieser Zeit regieren wird.
Okay, so when you stand at the final review, who are you standing before?
Und wenn du zur finalen Untersuchung stehst, vor wem stehst du dann?
Well, let's just deal with the first Sunday law, right here then. Who are you standing before?
Also jetzt beim ersten Sonntagsgesetz, vor wem stehen wir da?
Let's not guess. The Bible Testament tells us. Where do we get where we're standing before this?
Also von wo bekommen wir das denn aus der Bibel? Vor wem wir
The
das
book of
stehen?
Daniel, right?
Vom
It's got
Buch
all
Daniel.
these stories relating to the Sunday law, and at the end you're going to stand before the king, right?
Es hat all diese Geschichten, die sich beziehen auf das Sonntagsgesetz und am Ende stehst du dann vor dem König.
So, who are you standing before?
Also vor wem stehst du dann?
Nebuchadnezzar, right?
Nebukadnezar.
And Nebuchadnezzar is whom?
Und wer ist Nebukadnezar?
The king of the north,
Der
right?
König des Nordens.
Who's ruling at the moment?
Wer regiert momentan?
The south, right?
Der Süden.
So you can't take stories that's talking about the king of the north and put yourself here standing before Nebuchadnezzar, right?
Also du kannst nicht Geschichten nehmen, die von dem König des Nordens sprechen und dann sagen, dass du hier da stehst vor
Okay,
dem.
that's something that we haven't understood, right?
Also das ist etwas, was wir noch nicht verstanden haben.
So when we talk about this little time period here, which is not the final review, right?
Wenn wir von dieser kleinen Zeitperiode sprechen, was nicht die finale Untersuchung ist,
But it's speaking about an experience that's going to prefigure your second birth, right?
aber es spricht über eine Erfahrung, was eben deine zweite Geburt typifiziert.
For instance, the Lord changeth not, right?
Zum Beispiel der Herr verändert sich nicht.
Okay, it says a man that is a heretic after the second admonition reject, right?
Und er sagt ja, ein Mann, der ein Heretiker ist, nach der zweiten Warnung, ja, verwirf ihn.
What is that referring to?
Was bezieht sich das?
Okay, I'll read it again, I'll say it again. A man after the second admonition reject. What's it referring to?
Also, noch einmal, ein Mann nach der zweiten Warnung verwirf ihn. Also, von was spricht
You're not wrong, but you're missing the point.
Also, Engelsbotschaft ist nicht ganz falsch, aber
It's in exactly what I said there. A man after the second admonition, right?
also ein Mann nach der zweiten
What's it referring to?
Warnung. Auf was bezieht sich das?
No, the second angel's message, right?
Es bezieht sich auf die zweite
So,
Engelsbotschaft.
the Gospels, the first and second angel's messages, which prepare you to stand in the judgment. The judgment is the last point, right?
Also das Evangelium ist die erste und zweite Engelsbotschaft, die dich vorbereitet, eben, dass du dann stehst vor dem König, was
Okay. So,
die dritte ist, was das Gericht ist.
okay, the first angel's message when it comes points you forward to the judgment, right?
Also die ersten zwei Warnungen, sie zeigen dich vorwärts auf das
The
Gericht.
second angel's message prepares you for the judgment.
Okay. Entschuldige, die erste Engelsbotschaft, sie weist dich eben nach vor. Die zweite Engelsbotschaft, die bereitet dich vor.
Right? So you've got these two. You've got this one that brings fear into your heart and brings you to repentance. The other one then converts you to prepare you to stand in the judgment. Right?
Also die erste, die bringt Furcht in dein Herz, dass du Buße tust. Und die zweite, die bereitet dich vor, dass du im Gericht stehen kannst.
We get that point, right?
Steht das jeder?
No, I can't remember why I was making that point, but it doesn't matter. We'll come back to it, right?
Also wir kommen dann noch zurück darauf.
The point is that the Lord doesn't change, right?
Also der Punkt ist, dass der Herr sich nicht verändert.
Okay. I hate it when I can't remember my thought, but it doesn't matter. I'll come back to me in a minute. Go into the notes that I've posted there, and also in the German, the first quote that's posted there.
Also gehen wir zu den Notizen oder zu den Zitaten, die im Livestream sind.
Okay, that was the point I was making. I'll just remember. So, who in our prophetic narrative, who is a symbol of the first and second angels' messages?
Also in der prophetischen Erzählung, wer ist ein Symbol für die erste und zweite Engelsbotschaft?
No, guys, those things are true, but think about what we're talking about. We're talking about the first and second admonition. These things, who symbolizes these two things?
Also wer symbolisiert,
John and Christ, right?
okay, wer symbolisiert eben diese ersten zwei Warnungen, Johannes und Christus?
Okay, so John and Christ, right?
Also Johannes und Christus.
It's not going to change that way. It's two births that you have to do to enter into the kingdom, right?
Also es sind zwei Geburten, durch die du gehen musst, um in das Königreich einzugehen.
So a man that is a heretic after the second admonition, reject him, right?
Also ein Mann, der ein Heretiker ist, nach der zweiten Warnung verwirf ihn.
This is the final review. This is the close of probation, right?
Also das ist die finale Untersuchung, das ist das Ende der Gnadenzeit.
Okay, so John has to come out of the belly, right?
Also Johannes muss aus diesem Bauch herauskommen.
So there is a belly experience here that prefigures this final belly experience, right?
Also hier ist eine Baucherfahrung, die diese finale Baucherfahrung vorausschattet.
So let's just take, for instance, 9/11.
So nehmen wir zum Beispiel 9/11.
Whose probation closed there?
Für wen hat sich da die Gnadenzeit geschlossen?
Okay, the Lord didn't close the door on anybody there, right?
Also der Herr hat nicht die Türen für irgendwen verschlossen.
Okay, but people that rejected the truth, can they advance any further?
Aber Menschen, die die Wahrheit verworfen haben, können sie weiter vorwärts gehen.
No. It's just the way it's very clear. Those that refuse the message of John cannot receive the message of Christ, right?
Und da ist auch Schwester White ganz klar, diejenigen, die eben die Botschaft von Johannes verwerfen, können nicht die Botschaft von Christus erhalten.
Those that reject the message of Christ, what do?
Und diejenigen, die eben die Botschaft von Christus dann verworfen haben, was haben sie getan?
They crucify him, right?
Sie haben
Then they close the door,
gekreuzigt.
right?
Und dann
Okay.
waren ihre Türen geschlossen.
So it's about these two messages. You've got to go through the whole thing before the door closes, right?
Also es geht um diese zwei Botschaften. Du musst durch das Ganze gehen, bevor deine Tür geschlossen ist.
That is not fiction. That is a fact from a never-changing God, right?
Und das ist keine Fiktion, sondern das sind eben Fakten, wie Gott
Right.
ist.
So, okay, so we understand that at this point he needs to prefigure this, right?
Und wir verstehen, an diesem Punkt muss er das hier vorausschauen.
Just like John prefigures Christ. Right?
So wie auch Johannes Christus vorausschaut.
Just like the first Sunday law, when you get the people here, it's going to prefigure what the Lord wants to attain to here, right?
Und so wie bei der ersten Sonntagskrise, die Menschen müssen eben die Menschen hier vorausschatten.
Okay, but this is the final review. This is not the final review.
Aber das ist die finale Untersuchung und das ist nicht die finale Untersuchung.
Neither is this the final review.
Und das ist auch nicht die finale
Okay,
Untersuchung.
we must be very clear about that, right?
Also wir müssen sehr klar über diese Dinge sein.
Otherwise, we're saying God judging us right there at this point. He's closing our door upon us, and that's not true.
Und sonst werden wir sagen, dass Gott uns eben hier richtet und dass er die Türen für uns schließt.
We might close the door upon ourselves, but He's not closing the door upon us, right?
Also wir mögen vielleicht die Türen für uns selbst schließen, aber nicht er schließt für uns die Türen.
Okay, so I just want us to there's many things we don't understand, but the things that we do understand, we should stick rigidly to them, right?
Also es gibt vieles, was wir nicht verstehen, aber die Sachen, die wir verstehen, da müssen wir eben dann klar stehen.
Okay, firstly, we're under Biden. It's something new to us, right? We don't understand this, right?
Also zuerst einmal sind wir unter beiden und das ist etwas Neues für uns und wir verstehen das nicht richtig.
Okay, but one thing we do understand, there's like the same illustration of the gospel here, the seven thunders, these waymarks where similar principles will be applied at each one of those waymarks, right?
Aber eines verstehen wir eben, dass auch diese 7 Donner sind, dieses Evangelium und diese Prinzipien, die sind eben hier anzuwenden.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just sticking to facts. I'm not going to get into things that I don't understand, right? So let's go to this first quote.
Also ich halte mich einfach an Fakten, ich werde jetzt nicht zu den Dingen gehen, die wir nicht richtig verstehen.
Okay, so when we're looking at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's maybe some slight confusion over these false prophets that Christ is referring to, right?
Und in Matthäus, Markus und Lukas, da ist ein bisschen Verwirrung über diese falschen Propheten, worüber eben Christus spricht.
So I don't like it when we have confusion. So I want to go back and put in the place facts, right? Just factual things that we can prove, and don't worry about the things that we don't understand, right?
Deswegen möchte ich eben nochmal zurückgehen und die klaren Fakten eben auslegen. Nicht die Dinge, die wir nicht verstehen, sondern das, was wir eben schon verstehen.
Okay, let's begin in this quote in
Beginnen wir jetzt in diesem Zitat,
Great Controversy.
im großen Kampf.
With every truly converted soul, the relation to God and to eternal things will be the great topic of life. What's that first sentence saying to us?
Was sagt dieser erste Satz zu uns?
What would be a similar illustration of that?
Es wäre eine ähnliche Darstellung von dem.
The third angel's message is to engross the whole mind, the whole attention, right?
Also die dritte Engelsbotschaft, sie sollte den ganzen Verstand und die ganze Aufmerksamkeit
So
einnehmen.
a truly converted person will only have an interest for the third angel's message. Everything else will be secondary, right?
Also eine wahre bekehrte Seele wird nur Interesse haben für die dritte Engelsbotschaft und alles andere wird eben zweitrangig sein.
Because they will realize that this is the only thing, that's their only hope in this life, right?
Sie werden eben erkennen, dass das ihre einzige Hoffnung in ihrem Leben ist.
But it says, but where in the popular churches of today is the spirit of consecration to God? The converts do not renounce their pride and love of the world. They are no more willing to deny self, to take up the cross and follow the meek and lowly Jesus than before their conversion. Religion has become the sport of infidels and skeptics because so many who bear its name are ignorant of its what? Principles. So why is there so many skeptics out there?
Also warum gibt es so viele Zweifler und Skeptiker?
Because there's so many Christians put the name of Christ on their lips, but it's a different Christ, right?
Denn es gibt so viele Menschen, die eben den Namen Christi auf ihren Lippen verwenden, aber
It's a different Christ.
es ist ein anderer Christus.
It's not the Christ of the Bible,
Es
right?
ist nicht der Christus der Bibel.
Okay. The power of godliness has well nigh departed from many of the churches. Picnics, church theatricals, church fairs, fine houses, personal display have banished thoughts of God. Lands and goods and worldly occupations engross the mind, and things of eternal interest receive hardly a passing notice. Right? So it's true that we have things that we have to do, but the third angel's message must be first and foremost in our mind, right?
Also es stimmt, wir haben natürlich Dinge zu tun und so, aber die dritte Engelsbotschaft, die sollte eben unseren ganzen Verstand einnehmen.
Okay, it says, notwithstanding the widespread declension of faith and piety, there are true followers of Christ in these churches. So, according to what we've just read, according to the context of what we're reading, what would denote a true follower?
Also jetzt nach dem Kontext, was wir gelesen haben, was würde einen wahren Nachfolger Christi ausmachen?
Somebody who understands the principles correctly, and somebody who has the third angel's message in their fourth mind, and it's their sole desire in life to uphold that, right?
Also jemand, der die Prinzipien kennt, der auch die dritte Engelsbotschaft ja in seinem Verstand hat und der sich danach sehnt. What was the
Their sole desire is to uphold those principles.
Und ja, seine Sehnsucht ist eben, dass er diese Dinge aufrechterhält.
Okay, so it says, before the final visitation of God's judgments upon the earth, there will be among the people of the Lord such a revival of primitive godliness as has not been witnessed since apostolic times. The Spirit and power of God will be poured out upon His children. Right, so before we go any further, where was that prefigured? Where was this point prefigured in our history?
Also wo wurde dieser Punkt hier vorausgeschüttet in unserer Geschichte?
1840.
Okay, well done, Matt. 1840, right?
1840.
So, when we come down, right, so we take the Sunday law, right here till the closed door, right?
Also wenn wir jetzt das Sonntagsgesetz nehmen, bis hin zur geschlossenen
This
Tür,
would be Matthew 25, right here, verses 6 to 10, right?
dann wäre das hier ja Matthäus 25, Verse 6 bis 10.
Okay, so August 11th, 1840 would mark this point, right?
Also der 11. August 1840 wäre dann dieser Punkt,
Where they went forward with great power, but they were still able to fall, right?
wo sie eben mit großer Kraft vorwärts gegangen sind, aber sie waren noch immer in der Lage zu fallen.
Okay, and that would be this point right here.
Und das wäre dieser Punkt hier.
Okay, but it will be prefigured in some way in this little time, but by the first group of people that receive a power to go gather in the next group of people, right?
Und das ist eben vorausgeschattet in diese Zeit, wo eben die erste Gruppe von Menschen eben vorwärts gehen wird, um diese zweite Gruppe zu sammeln.
Okay, so when we go back to this, right, go back to the point we just read, it says, before the final visitation of God's judgments upon the earth. So, where's the final visitation of God's judgments upon the earth?
Also wo ist diese letzte Heimsuchung von Gottes Gerichten auf dieser Erde?
The final review, right? This is what it's pointed, right?
It's
So-
typified by the final review.
Finalen Untersuchung.
Well, this is the final
No,
review.
what I mean is that she actually speaks here about the 7 last plagues.
No, I'm not denying that, but what I'm saying is this parallel to this. We all know what we mean, right? At this point here, there will be a huge punishment coming that will prefigure the 7 last plagues that come here, right?
Also zu diesem Punkt wird ja eine schwere Bestrafung eben stattfinden, was diesen Punkt bei den 7 letzten Tagen eben vorausschattet.
Okay, so the point is, when you come down here, you can say, before this point comes, there will be seen a great revival amongst God's people, right?
Also dann können wir sagen, vor diesem Punkt hier wird eben eine große Erweckung stattfinden.
But for argument's sake, let's go to the perfect fulfillment here, right?
Aber gehen wir halt zur perfekten Erfüllung hier.
So she's talking about, as Pura says, but the 7 last plagues, right?
Also Schwester White spricht über diese 7 letzten Plagen.
Before this judgment comes here, there's going to be seen a revival of primitive godliness that has never been seen since apostolic times, right?
Und vor dieser Bestrafung eben hier wird eine große Erweckung stattfinden von, ja, die eben noch nie gesehen wurde seit
Okay, so let's go back and read it. We'll just put these where that's going to take place, right?
Jetzt mit diesem Zitat.
It says, the Spirit and power of God will be poured out upon His children. At that time, what time? Where the Spirit and power of the Lord is poured out, right?
Also zu welcher Zeit? Zu der Zeit, wo eben der Geist Gottes ausgegossen wird.
Many will separate themselves from those churches in which the love of this world has supplanted love for God and His Word. Many, both of ministers and people, will gladly accept those great truths which God has caused to be proclaimed at this time, to prepare a people for the Lord's second coming. Right? So question. Can that pouring come out here?
Also kann diese Ausgießung hier kommen.
Is this where this Spirit and power is going to come to prepare them?
Also
No.
ist das, wo diese Kraft und dieser Geist kommen, um sie
Okay,
vorzubereiten.
what does the Lord need to have in order to prepare a people?
Was braucht der Herr, um eben ein Volk vorzubereiten?
Yes, someone to be His voice, right?
Jemand, der seine Stimme ist.
So that takes us to here, right?
Also das bringt uns dann hierhin.
First principle, right?
Erstes Prinzip.
He has to raise up a people first. So in the big fractal, it's the church, right? He raises up those in the church right here, and they are now going to bring forth His last message where people are going to separate themselves all the way down. Boom, it's done, right?
Und er braucht eben ein Volk und hier im großen Fraktal ist es eben die Gemeinde, die eben dieses Werk tut und es werden immer, ja, Trennungen immer wieder stattfinden bis zu diesem letzten Punkt dann.
So at the final review, the Holy Spirit is poured out without measure, right?
Also zur finalen Untersuchung ist eben der Geist Gottes ausgegossen ohne Maß.
Okay, so let's at that time, many will separate themselves from those churches in which the love of this world has supplanted love for God and His Word. Many, both of ministers and people, will gladly accept those great truths which God has caused to be proclaimed at this time to prepare a people for the Lord's second coming. So on August the 11th, 1840, there was a great religious awakening, right?
Also am 11. August 1840 war eben ein großes Erwachen.
Okay, but let's look. It says, the enemy of souls desires to hinder this work, right? So which work is he talking about?
Also über welches Werk spricht
That God would have a people filled with the Spirit going forward to prepare a people for the day of the Lord, right?
Dass eben Gott ein Volk hat, was gefüllt ist mit dem Geist, was eben vorwärts geht, um dieses Werk zu tun.
So, the enemy of souls desires to hinder this work, and before the time for such a movement shall come, he will endeavour to prevent it by introducing a counterfeit, right? So, prior to this point, there will be a counterfeit coming, right?
Also vor diesem Punkt wird eben eine Fälschung stattfinden.
So, prior to this point, there will be what? A
Also
counterfeit.
vor diesem Punkt wird auch eben eine Fälschung sein.
So, prior to this point, there will be a counterfeit, right?
Also auch vor diesem Punkt wird dann eine Fälschung sein.
That's a principle that doesn't change, right?
Also das ist ein Prinzip, was sich nicht
So whenever the Lord is about to pour out His Spirit on a people, right, Satan will bring in a counterfeit prior to that point, right?
Also wann immer eben Gott seinen Geist ausgießt auf sein Volk, wird Satan vorher eben eine Fälschung bringen.
Okay. In those churches which he can bring under his deceptive power, he will make it appear that God's special blessing is poured out. There will be manifest what is thought to be a great religious interest. Multitudes will exult that God is working marvelously for them when the work is that of another spirit. Under a religious guise, Satan will seek to extend his influence over the Christian world. Right? Now, where does Satan put on a religious guise?
Also wo zieht Satan dieses religiöse Gewand an?
I mean, at different waymarks, but
Yes, but just okay. Let's deal with.
Candlelight, the Midnight Cry, tries it at the end again.
Mitternachts.
Okay, but
It's before this point. That's what she's talking in the context.
okay. Let's deal with one point at a time, right? 1848, right?
Also 1848.
She says the winds were held in check so as not to prevent the work of the third angel, right?
Also Schwester Wald, sagt eben, dass die Winde zurückgehalten wurden, dass es nicht das Werk des Engels eben aufhält.
Okay, we know that there's power poured out there to give God's people power to withstand the temptations in this time period, right?
Also wir wissen, dass hier Kraft ausgegossen wird, damit eben Gottes Volk bestehen kann in dieser Zeit der Versuchung.
Okay, and if you go look at the history of 1848, was there a group that was proclaiming false things right there? Yes.
Und wenn wir zu der Geschichte von 1848 zurückgehen, war da eine Gruppe, die eben falsche Dinge gepredigt hat.
First Day Adventists, right?
Also das waren diese ersten Tagsadventisten.
What did they say it was?
Was haben sie gesagt?
Yes, they said it was the shaking of the heavens and the earth, right?
Also sie haben gesagt, dass eben hier das Erschüttern der Himmel und der Erde stattgefunden
But it
hat.
wasn't. It was the beginning of sorrows, right?
Aber das war es nicht, das war erst der Anfang der Wehen.
Okay, but within this right here, we spent much putting this in place, right? That you have the daily, followed by the transgression of desolation, which is the papacy, right?
Und wir haben das ja schon auf den Platz gesetzt, dass eben hier das tägliche ist und hier eben dieses Gräuel der Verwüstung.
So, come back to my question. Where does the papacy, where does Satan put on a religious garb?
Und wo zieht dann Satan dieses religiöse Gewand an?
Okay, at this point, right? Okay.
Also auf diesem Punkt.
So, in this way, it's also the 1260, so it's marking there, it's marking there, right? So we've got no problem with that, right?
Und das ist ja auch die 1260, also ist es auch hier markiert, so wie hier.
Okay, because we know we can take the Midnight Cry parallel with the Sunday Law, and you have same truths parallel each other at the beginning, right?
Denn wir wissen ja, wir können das Sonntagsgesetz und den Mitternachtsruf parallel setzen, dann haben wir auch dieselben Prinzipien parallel.
Okay, so it says, let's go to the next paragraph.
Zum nächsten Paragraphen.
In many of the revivals which have occurred during the last half century, the same influences have been at work, to a greater or less degree, that will be manifest in the more extensive movements of the future. There is an emotional excitement, a mingling of the true with the false, that is well adapted to mislead. So, how will these movements look like?
Also wie werden diese Bewegungen aussehen?
It tells it right there, we just read it. Just
Das haben wir gerade gelesen.
okay, it'll be a mingling, the true and the false. So it'll look like it's true, but you have to determine, you have to see the evil that's mingled in there, right?
Und es ist eben dieses Vermischen von diesem Gut und Böse und es wird eben wie das Gute aussehen, aber du musst eben dieses Falsche, diesen Irrtum darin erkennen.
So she's going to tell us now, none need be deceived, right?
Also sie sagt dir, dass niemand verführt sein muss.
So what did Christ say?
Und was hat Christus gesagt?
Be not deceived, right?
Seid nicht verführt.
In the light of God's word, it is not difficult to determine the nature of these movements. So, what do you use to determine whether it's true or not?
Also was benutzt du, um zu unterscheiden, ob es wahr oder nicht ist?
God's word, right? Wherever men neglect the testimony of the Bible, turning away from those plain, soul-testing truths which require self-denial and renunciation of the world, there we may be sure that God's blessing is not bestowed. So, what will cause God's blessing to be removed from us?
Also was wird verursachen, dass Gottes Segen von uns weggenommen wird?
Yeah, when we neglect the testimony of the Bible, when we start mingling it with our own preconceived ideas, right?
Also wenn wir dieses Zeugnis der Bibel eben vernachlässigen, wenn wir eben vermischen dieses Wahre mit dem Falschen.
Okay, and specifically it says when you turn away from plain soul-testing truths which require self-denial and renunciation of the world. So, did the Lord give us a very clear illustration of this?
Also hat uns der Herr eine ganz klare Darstellung von dem gegeben.
Amen.
No, but specifically, you come on, you must know what I'm talking about. What was the clear illustration of this?
Also was war eine klare Darstellung davon?
No, this what we're talking about. Turning away from those plain soul-testing truths which require self-denial and renunciation of the world. Okay. Parminder, right, yes. Okay.
Das hat eben Parminder erfüllt.
Now remember, no. Okay. Satan is very deceptive, right?
So Satan verführt ja sehr.
The daily. What is it that we understand about the daily?
Und was verstehen wir über das tägliche?
It's open rebellion. You can see it very clearly, right?
Also es ist offene Rebellion, wir können es ganz offen sehen.
It's the South.
Es ist der Süden.
Biden, what's he doing right now?
Und was macht Biden gerade?
Yeah, you can slay babies. You can be an LGBTQ. You can do all these wicked things. It's open rebellion against God, right?
Man kann Kinder abtreiben und all diese Dinge. Das ist einfach offene Rebellion gegenüber Gott.
Parminder called God a liar, right?
Parminder hat Gott einen Lügner genannt.
This is what Satan called God. It's when he did this was plain, open rebellion, right?
Und auch Satan nennt eben Gott einen Lügner. Und als er das getan hat, dass er von diesen Wahrheiten, Prinzipien weggegangen ist, dann war das einfach offene Rebellion gegenüber Gott.
So you can be sure that this is a false revival, right?
Also wir können uns sicher sein, dass es eine falsche Erweckung
All
ist.
sticking their trousers on, partying, going to beaches, doing all sorts of worldly. They're just enjoying life now, waiting to be saved according to Parminder's word, right?
Und indem sie halt diese Hosen anziehen und ja, ihre Feiern haben und alles Mögliche. Und das ist einfach,
Sie genießen das Leben und warten, dass sie gerettet werden.
okay, ja, sie genießen einfach das Leben und warten halt einfach darauf, dass sie
Okay,
gerettet
there's
werden.
no cross in that movement anymore, right?
Also da ist kein Kreuz mehr in dieser Bewegung.
But the deceptive point is that Satan is going to hide himself in a religious cloak, right?
Aber das Verführerische wird eben sein, dass Satan sich dann in diesem religiösen Gewand dann eben verkleidet.
That's the Pharisees, right?
Das sind diese Pharisäer.
This comes in Jeff, right? Starts to uphold and say, that's evil what you're doing, right?
Da kommt eben dann Jeff und er, ja, behält halt eben diese Prinzipien und sagt, das ist böse, was sie tut.
But it says, and by the rule which Christ himself has given, ye shall know them by their fruits. So when we came to this phrase right here, how do we understand that?
Also wenn wir zu dieser Phrase aus Matthäus kommen, was bedeutet das?
What does it mean to know them by their fruits?
Was bedeutet das, sie an ihren Früchten zu erkennen?
Sorry? Yes, knowing them by the things that they speak and what it produces, right? You'll see what the message that they speak and what it produces, right?
Also dass man einfach ja, sieht und hört, was eben die Botschaft, die gepredigt wird und auch das, was sie hervorruft.
Okay, so next paragraph.
Nächster Paragraph.
In the truths of his word, God has given to men a revelation of himself, and to all who accept them, they are a shield against the deceptions of Satan. So we must stand on a thus saith the Lord, right?
Also wir müssen ja stehen auf einem das sagt der Herr.
It is a neglect of these truths that has opened the door to the evils which are now becoming so widespread in the religious world. The nature and the importance of the law of God have been to a great extent lost sight of. A wrong conception of the character, the perpetuity and the obligation of the divine law has led to errors in relation to conversion and sanctification. So, what were we getting reproved of right here?
Also von was wurden wir hier ja, zurechtgewiesen?
And we didn't understand first principle.
Yeah, which is conversion and sanctification, right?
What did you say?
Was eben Bekehrung und Heiligung ist.
Yeah.
Also es sind diese ersten
Don't understand the first birth,
Also
right?
wir verstehen diese erste Geburt nicht.
So what's the Lord been doing
Also was hat dann der Herr
since
getan
this point?
seit diesem Punkt?
Correcting our errors.
You're correcting our errors, but He's been taking us to the sanctuary, right? Specifically, and helping us to understand these principles of conversion, right?
Er hat uns eben zum Heiligtum geführt und dass wir eben diese Prinzipien ja, verstehen können in dieser Geburt.
So errors in relation to conversion and sanctification and has resulted in lowering the standard of piety in the church. Here is to be found the secret of the lack of spirit and power of God in revivals of our time. Now Jeff's done the same, right? He claims to be upholding the law, but he denies the very means by which you're sanctified.
Also Jeff macht genau dasselbe. Er hält eben dieses Gesetz aufrecht, aber er vernachlässigt eben diese
The means by which you're sanctified.
diese Mittel, durch die wir eben geheiligt werden.
Okay, right. So let's now go to Luke chapter 21, right?
So gehen wir jetzt zu Lukas
And I want
21.
to look at these false prophets.
Wir schauen uns diese falschen Propheten an.
Luke 21. Let's begin in verse 7.
Beginnen wir an Vers 7.
And they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be, and what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? What are they referring to?
Also auf was bezieht sich das? Oder beziehen sich die Jünger?
This punishment in this sense on the church, right here, right? The final review,
Also sie beziehen sich auf diese finale Untersuchung.
right? For the church, that's the end of the world. For the rest of the world, that's the end of the world, right?
Also für die Gemeinde ist das Ende der Welt und für die restlichen das hier.
Right? Same time. There's going to be two points. 2 points 2 points, right?
Also es sind 2 Zeitpunkte und hier auch. Und
Okay. So it says, when shall these things be? What sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? And he said, take heed that ye be not deceived. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near. Go ye not after them. Okay, so when these people arise, what are you not to do?
Also wenn diese Menschen eben aufkommen, was sollst du dann nicht tun?
You're not to go after them, right?
Du sollst ihnen nicht nachgehen.
Now, I want to make it very clear that when Christ is standing on the Mount of Olives, he's talking about a future event, right?
Und als eben Christus auf diesem Berg stand, dann hat er über zukünftige Ereignisse gesprochen.
But at the same time, that future event is coming to a close right at the same point he's at, right?
Und zur gleichen Zeit werden eben diese zukünftigen Ereignisse finden ein Ende zu diesem Zeitpunkt, wo er gerade steht.
Okay, so he's at the beginning, or he's at the beginning point pointing forward, but he's also at the end, right?
Also er steht sozusagen an diesem Anfang und das weist eben nach vor, aber zur gleichen Zeit ist er auch an diesem Ende.
Okay, so when Sister White has this vision about the light and the exceeding bright light, where does that vision begin?
Und in dieser Vision von Schwester White über das Licht und das überaus helle Licht, wo beginnt diese Vision?
On the line, where does it begin?
Auf der Linie, wo beginnt das?
No, we read it yesterday. Made this point so clear yesterday. It begins at the midnight cry.
Also es beginnt am Mitternachtsruf.
Go back and read it. 1845 says this vision begins at the midnight cry, right?
Und da sagt es eben, diese Vision beginnt zum Mitternachtsruf.
Yes, maybe you were not paying attention yesterday, Maris. Remember, Fyodor made this point. I specifically pointed to Fyodor and said the class that you did a couple of days or last week. What comes? Let's just take the end point. What comes right here?
Also was kommt genau hier?
Yeah, the formula rain. So we're not denying the principle, right? That I even made this point, right? Former, ladder, right?
Also der Früh- und der Spätregen. Also Früh- und Spätregen.
Former, ladder.
Früh- und Spätregen.
Even in the 10, former, ladder, right?
Und genau dasselbe auch dann in der 10.
But that's not the point, right? I'm asking, where on, just on this board right here, where does that vision begin?
Und auf dieser Tafel hier, wo beginnt die Vision von Ellen White?
Look, there's lots of places where it's written midnight cry. I'm asking, point to me on the board, right, where we would begin to place that vision.
Also wo würden wir diese Vision eben hin platzieren?
I mean, the vision and this whole is speaking about the middle fraction.
Okay, right, we're in the right place. So where on this point does it begin?
Was hast du gesagt?
This middle fractal.
Spricht über das mittlere Fraktal.
Okay.
It's dealing with this fractal. So now let's take that vision. Where does it begin?
Also diese Vision, wo beginnt sie?
In this tender.
Okay, right here, right?
Also sie beginnt hier.
So why is this the midnight cry?
Warum ist das der Mitternachtsruf?
That's not what he said, right? He said in the beginning of the 10, he would point at the end.
No, I'm just pointing to this 10 here, right?
Okay, then maybe it was.
Okay, you can't ascertain that there's no waymark in there, right? But that's neither here nor there. But the point is, right?
No, he said, or maybe, what did you say?
Said in this little tender.
In the 10. Okay. Then I misunderstood what I said, so.
Okay. So the point is, it's marking a point, right, where when the exceeding bright light comes, and what in history, what marked the exceeding bright light?
In der Geschichte, was hat das überhaupt Licht markiert?
August 11th, 1840, right? So just let's put it there. August
11.
the
August
11th.
1840.
And August 11th, 1840 marks a point where people receive the power, but they can still fall. right?
Und das hat eben einen Punkt in der Geschichte markiert, wo Menschen Kraft erhalten haben, aber sie konnten noch immer fallen.
That's John,
Und das ist Johannes.
right? John at the future, where's he going to go?
Und Johannes in der Zukunft, wohin geht er da?
In jail, and then he's going to be beheaded, right?
Also er geht ins Gefängnis und dann wird er auch geköpft.
Okay, so marks the point where the Spirit and power is poured out upon God's people, typifying the latter rain, right?
Und es markiert eben einen Punkt, wo dieser Geist Gottes ausgegossen wird und das markiert eben diesen Spätregen.
How do we know it typifies the latter rain?
Also es typifiziert diesen Spätregen. Woher wissen wir da?
Because Sister White tells us very clearly that this prefigures the outpouring of the latter rain at the end of the world, right?
Denn Schwester White sagt das eben ganz klar, dass das Ausgießen des Spätregens am Ende der Welt vorausschattet.
People are going to go from place to place with their faces lit up with God's glory, right?
Also Menschen werden von Platz zu Platz gehen und sie werden eben erleuchtet sein von dieser Herrlichkeit.
What's up,
Gottes.
Marius?
So where exactly begins the vision?
Also wo beginnt genau die Vision?
8040 is exceeding bright light, yes. So where's the former, the thing, or the light?
In this point right here.
Also,
Not the beginning,
beginnt hier.
in. So
Listen.
Oder in.
We've made this. I made this point the other day. And we need to pay attention when we're making these points, right? The principle is always the same. There'll always be former followed by latter, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Also das Prinzip ist immer dasselbe, es ist zuerst der Frühregen gefolgt vom Spätregen.
Okay. So, if you want to go back to the vision, it's either here and here or it's here and here. I'm not arguing that point at this point in time. But nonetheless, the exceeding bright light marks the end point, right?
Und die Vision, sie markiert eben entweder diesen Punkt oder eben diesen Punkt. Aber eins ist halt klar, dass das überaus helle Licht am Ende kommt.
And it doesn't really matter at this point, right? It doesn't matter. You know that whenever light comes to you, you've got to receive it in order to receive the latter rain, right?
Und es macht in dem Sinne auch nichts aus, weil wir müssen ja immer dieses Licht erhalten, wenn es zu uns kommt.
Right? So we don't need to get into that argument.
No, but
Oh.
I just want to understand. So the light is the former rain, yes?
Yes.
Also
So the
das
former-
Licht ist dieser Frühregen.
Comes not at the beginning.
Does the former rain come here, Maris?
Yes, and
Does the former rain come here?
and on the bottom line.
Yeah, okay, I'm just saying, does former rain come here?
Yes.
Does former rain come here?
Yes.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. He made this point in the class, right? So it doesn't matter. The former rain always comes at every waymark before, leading you down to the latter rain, right?
Und der Frühregen, der kommt eben immer zu jedem Zeitpunkt und der führt dich eben zum Spätregen.
The point that I'm making, Sister White, because we always use the other quote, when we go to Broadside, she says that it begins at the midnight cry.
Wenn wir zu dieser Broadside-Vision gehen, dann sagt es, dass es beginnt am Mitternachtsruf.
So the other day, where did we place the midnight cry?
Und am Tag zuvor, wo haben wir den Mitternachtsruf markiert?
Come on, Maris, you can answer this question. Where did we place it?
And
Okay, at the end, right? So it wouldn't be marking this point because that's not, okay, so it has to be one of these. So it would be this, right?
Also es wäre dann dieser hier.
So this is why I'm making this argument, right? That when you come to this point, it's marking a point where a people are now standing before the king and giving a testimony for the truth, right?
Also es markiert einen Punkt, wo eben die Menschen vor dem König stehen und eben ein Zeugnis geben von der Wahrheit.
So that would be here, right?
Es wäre dann hier.
Okay. Now, the point I want to make is, when that exceeding bright light came, what happened?
Also als dann dieses überaus helle Licht gekommen ist, was ist dann passiert?
How many classes were produced right there?
Wie viele Klassen wurden erzeugt?
2, right?
2.
And one group accepted the light. What did the other group do?
Und eine Gruppe hat ja das Licht angenommen. Was hat die andere
They
getan?
immediately resisted it, right?
Sie haben dem sofort widerstanden.
Now, I will come back to this point tomorrow and I'll dig out this quote that talks about August 11th, 1840. And it shows that there are false prophets that rise up here and they're trying to deceive people in this time period.
Und Ich werde eben dieses Zitat noch heraussuchen, wo Schwester Wald sagt, dass zum 11. August 1840 eben auch diese falschen Propheten aufgestanden sind und in dieser Zeit eben verführen werden.
Okay, so go back to Luke 21, right?
Gehen wir zurück zu
We'll
Lukas
clear these
21.
little points up in our mind as we go along, right? So, verse 8, he says, "Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near, go ye not after them. But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass. But the end is not by and by." So he's pointing forward now to the next waymark. Or in this case, it would be this waymark, right?
Also weist jetzt vor auf diese Wegmarke. In diesem Fall wäre es diese Wegmarke.
Because this is this point, the wars and commotions that's going to come, right?
Denn das ist der Punkt, wo eben diese Kriege und Kriegsgerüchte sind.
Right? Everybody sure that they understand what I'm saying?
Ist sich jeder sicher, dass er versteht, was ich sage?
There's one question. Do you separate verse 8 and 9?
Also trennst du Vers 8 und 9?
Well, they're two separate thoughts, but verse
No.
9 is...
Because you read verse 7 and 8, pointing it to one point, and then verse 9 you point to
I
another
didn't point verse 8 to any point.
Maybe I misunderstood what you said.
I didn't. I just read it. I just read it. Why are you saying I'm separating?
No, because you read it in connection with verse 7, and then you made your point, pointing it to the final review. So I wanted to understand whether that's what I understood you correctly, or whether I misunderstood.
I will. I'm not going to go over the same ground over and over, Fyodor. Right? Christ is standing at the end.
No, I know what Christ said.
Okay, but when he's standing at the end, are there false prophets rising up there?
Also Christus steht am Ende und
Ja,
stehen da
of
falsche
course.
Propheten
Okay.
auf.
Sister White uses this verse right here to point to the end also.
Und Schwester
I've
Wald,
read it, don't know how many times over the last few days.
I'm just asking.
I'm just saying that this is the end, but it's also marking the beginning, right?
also das ist das Ende und das markiert auch den Anfang.
So he's talking about this point right here where false prophets are going to rise, but he's pointing forward to this point.
Also er spricht über diesen Punkt, wo falsche Propheten aufkommen, aber er weist eben auf diesen
So,
Punkt hin.
so you were saying verse 8 is the false prophet at the final review. That's what.
No, I'm
Or you also saying these are also
Wait,
point.
Fyodor, don't try to draw me in like that, right?
Why you say
I'm
that?
saying, I'm being clear to you. Sister White takes that verse, I'll say it real clear. She takes that verse and she puts it at the end, right? I didn't do it, she did it, right?
You can show me that quote, no problem. I just want to know what you do.
Oh, okay, and I'm explaining what I'm doing, right? So when the vision begins, right, it begins at the midnight cry, right?
Also wenn die Vision beginnt, dann beginnt sie am Mitternachtsruf.
I'm not arguing the point. I believe I can prove that, and I did prove that in this class, that there are false prophets in rising up at the final review. So that's not an issue.
Okay, that's the only point that I'm making. I'm not separating anything, right? And I premise this right at the beginning. I says, these things which Christ is saying, he's pointing forward, right?
Okay, yeah, and I was just asking when you say he's pointing forward, to which
Well,
point?
if he's standing here and he's pointing forward, it's something that comes in the future.
Also Christus
You
steht
didn't
hier und weist
specify
nach
which
vorn.
point yet. That was-
No, I'm not going to specify which point. I'm sticking to facts, right?
I was just wanted to clarify
Okay,
this fact,
but
what you were talking.
okay, we're pointing for. Just let's take it one step back. I'm not going to go into things that I don't know about. I'm going to go into things and put things factually that we can prove right here, right? So
just to make it then clear, so you would stick also verse 8 also at
at
the
a
Sunday
future
law,
point.
but also at the Sunday law, right?
We will clarify that when we come to the point where we can prove it, right? Otherwise, all we're doing is we're saying we're doing something and we're throwing our own words in there, right? I'm not denying that point, but when we come to that point where we can prove it, then we will put it there. Right? Are we happy with that? Okay.
Also Vers 8 wäre dann auch in die Zukunft gesetzt und das wahrscheinlich
I made this premise when we started, right? Let's go back and let's put points in place according to God's word. When we can establish, that's why I went to, where is this? Oh, it's here. Where is this? It's here, right? So let's do the same with all the verses, right? And then we can be absolutely certain that we're not just sticking on something we think we know, right? Is that a fair? Right? Well, then we know every single point we're standing on a thus saith the Lord.
Also wir gehen ja, Vers für Vers durch und schauen eben, wo das platziert ist.
Right, so verse 9.
Jetzt Vers 9.
But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must what? First come to pass. Right? So they're before the end of the judgment, right?
Also
So-
das ist vor dem Ende des Gerichtes.
Okay, so now I made this point the other day. We're going to have to close a minute. When Christ is standing here, right, who is he also a parallel to?
Wenn Christus hier steht, zu wem ist er dann auch eine Parallele?
Yes, to John, right? Past, the present, and the future, right?
Zu Johannes. Vergangenheit, Gegenwart und Zukunft.
And if you just go and read the great controversy, right, when the very first chapter about the destruction of Jerusalem, Christ is laying everything, line upon line, all down through the histories, bringing you to this this point.
Und in Desire of Ages?
Great controversy.
Okay. In
First chapter.
großer Kampf. Okay, in großer Kampf, dieses erste Kapitel über die Zerstörung von Jerusalem, da wird eben alles Linie auf Linie gelegt, was dich dann eben hinführt.
Okay,
dazu.
and in Desire of Ages, he also deals with the destruction of Jerusalem, but you have to bring those two things together and you'll get more information, right?
Und im Leben Jesu wird eben auch von dieser Zerstörung von Jerusalem gesprochen und das muss man dann Linie auf Linie zusammenbringen.
Okay, so now, okay, we know from the testimony of 1848 that Sister White says that the wars and rumours of wars that come here, these are the beginning of sorrows, these are the things that first come to pass, right?
Und wir wissen von dem Zeugnis von 1848, dass diese Kriege und Kriegsgerüchte eben das Erste ist, was kommt.
Okay, Nebuchadnezzar and all that, they're troubled. They're troubled because of what's happening right here at this point, right?
Nebukadnezar und all diese Könige, die sind eben beunruhigt wegen dem, was hier passiert.
Okay, then at verse 10 it says, Then
Vers 10.
said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines, and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. So what's it now talking about?
Also über was spricht das jetzt?
So in verse 9 there's a time of trouble, and now in verse 10 and 11 there's a different time of trouble.
Also in Vers 9, da ist eine Zeit der Trübsal und in Vers 10 und 11 ist dann eine andere Zeit der Trübsal.
Right?
Richtig?
Okay, go to Isaiah 19.
Gehen wir jetzt zu Jesaja 19.
It says, The burden of Egypt, behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud. What's he doing?
Also was tut er hier?
He's coming with clouds, right?
Also er kommt mit diesen Wolken.
To do what?
Was zu tun?
In the book of Jude, he cometh with 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands to execute judgment, right?
Also in dem Buch von Judas, da kommt er mit 10.000 mal 10.000, um eben Gericht auszuführen.
It says, And shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. So when he comes in the cloud, what happens to the heart of Egypt?
Also wenn er in diesen Wolken kommt, was passiert mit den Herzen von den Ägyptern?
It melts, right?
Es schmilzt.
Verse 2.
Vers 2.
And I will set Egyptians against Egyptians, and they shall fight every one against his brother, and every one against his neighbour, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. Right? And the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. So when Christ comes on the cloud, right, and their all hearts are failing, who do they turn to?
Also wenn Christus auf diese Wolke kommt und all ihre Herzen eben versagen, Auf wen weist das dann?
Ja, zu wem wenden Sie sich?
Oh, okay. Zu wem wenden sie sich dann?
Okay, the false prophets, right?
Zu diesen falschen Propheten.
Okay, so just making this point. So, right here, the Lord comes on a cloud. It's marking these false prophets, right? It's the end, but it's pointed forward to this, right?
Also genau hier kommt Christus in dieser Wolke und da sind eben dann auch diese falschen Propheten dann markiert. Aber es weist eben auf diesen Punkt hier hin.
Because this is the point that they're asking about, right?
Denn
When's the end of the world?
das ist ja der Punkt, worüber eben die Jünger fragen, wann ist das Ende der Welt?
But it says wars and commotions, they got to come first, right?
Aber es sagt eben, dass diese Kriege und Kriegsgerüchte zuerst kommen müssen.
And then it says then,
Und dann sagt es dann.
right? Okay, so then there shall be great signs from heaven, right? So go to verse 12
Dann sollen eben große Zeichen vom Himmel her sein.
and Luke, yes. Sorry.
Jetzt zurück zu Lukas 21 und Vers 12.
But it says, but before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons. So, before the signs from heaven,
Also vor diesen Zeichen vom Himmel,
so before the final review, when Christ comes in a cloud and sets kingdom against kingdom, and nation against nation, they're going to deliver you up, right?
also vor der finalen Untersuchung, wo Christus in diese Wolke kommt und eben ja, die Nationen gegeneinander aufgestachelt werden, da wirst du eben ausgeliefert werden.
Right?
Richtig?
So this point, when Christ is standing here, is also this point.
Also dieser Punkt ist dann auch dieser Punkt, wo Christus steht.
Right? Because he's showing future, but he's illustrating it right there, with the temple being cleansed for the second time.
Denn er spricht von der Zukunft, aber er illustriert es eben auch in seiner Zeit, eben wo der Tempel gereinigt wird zum zweiten Mal.
Okay, so this right here typifies this right here. Right?
Also das typifiziert das hier.
Everybody get that point, right?
Versteht
So
das hier?
before this time, what's Satan going to do?
Also vor dieser Zeit, was wird Satan tun?
Bring a counterfeit, right?
Er bringt eben diese Fälschung rein.
Okay, so go back to Luke 21 and verse 12.
Jetzt zurück zu Lukas 21 und Vers 12.
So, but before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And it shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it therefore in your hearts not to meditate before what ye shall answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And ye shall be betrayed by both parents and brethren and kinsfolk and friends, and some of you they shall cause to be put to death. So it's an order of events, right? You're going to be betrayed up before kings, put into prison, and some of you are going to be put to death, right?
Und das ist eben diese Reihenfolge von diesen Ereignissen. Ihr werdet eben vor Königen stehen und dann eben ausgeliefert werden und dann auch umgebracht werden.
Okay. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but there shall not a hair of your head perish. What's not going to happen to you?
Bis Vers 18. Was wird mit dir nicht passieren?
Okay, so go to Daniel chapter 3, right?
Also kein Haar von deinem Haupt wird eben verbrannt werden. Gehen wir zu Daniel 3.
Verse 8.
Daniel 3 und Vers 8.
So we would all agree that before this point here, before you stand before the kings, he brings a counterfeit, right?
Also wir stimmen alle überein, dass vor diesem Punkt, wo du eben vor dem König stehst, bringt der Satan eben eine Fälschung.
And right here is where Satan disguises himself in a religious guise externally, right?
Und das ist eben, wo Satan auch extern sich verkleidet mit diesem religiösen Gewand,
Marking Judas internally, right?
was dann eben dann Judas intern
We
markiert.
can come to that. So prior to this point, this counterfeit is going to rise up. And this counterfeit is what's going to deliver you up, right?
Und vor diesem Punkt eben ist diese Fälschung. Diese Fälschung, die wird dich eben ausliefern.
Okay, so verse 8.
Vers 8.
Wherefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. So the Jews are now being accused for not doing what?
Also die Juden, die werden jetzt beschuldigt, dass sie was nicht getan haben.
For not bowing down, right? When it comes at the beginning, the Sunday law, they refuse to bow down, right?
Also am Anfang des Sonntagsgesetzes weigern sie sich eben, sich niederzubeugen.
They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. Right? So they come and accuse these people for not doing this. Right?
Also sie kommen und verklagen eben diese Juden, dass sie eben das nicht getan haben.
Verse 13.
Vers 13.
Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. So we know that the prophetic testimony over and over again shows that you stand before the kings at this way, man, right? To begin with.
Also wir wissen ja, dass von der prophetischen Erzählung, dass der Anfang, wo du vor den Königen stehst, immer hier ist.
Okay, you stand before them first, and then you have this time that you ask for, right?
Also du stehst hier zuerst und dann fragst du um diese Zeit.
Okay. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said to them, It is true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye do not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up. Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. So what's music a symbol of in the Bible? What's the woman doing for the 70 years?
Also für was ist Musik ein Symbol? Was macht diese Frau in den 70 Jahren?
So what does it represent? It represents deceptions, right?
Sie singt wie eine Hure und das stellt eben diese Verführungen dar.
Okay. It says, But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand. So in this time period, they're making a decision, right?
Also in dieser Zeitperiode, da machen sie immer eine Entscheidung.
Right? It's this great decision for eternity that you're making it here, right?
Das ist diese große Entscheidung für die Ewigkeit, was du hier machst.
It's where you're really believing those promises that the Lord is able to deliver you, right?
Wo du eben glaubst in diese Verheißungen, dass der Herr dich eben befreien wird.
It says, But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury. So it takes us to a different point, right?
Also das bringt uns zu einem anderen Punkt.
And the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to do what? To bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. What's the third angel's message?
Bis Vers 20.
What does it do?
So was macht die dritte
Binds and seals, right?
Also sie bindet und sie versiegelt.
It's marking the separation of the wheat and tares, right?
Es markiert diese Trennung von Weizen und Unkraut.
So when they're being bound, this is marking now this final separation at the judgment.
Also wenn sie gebunden wird, dann markiert es eben diese finale Trennung am Gericht.
Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So at the very same time, what happens to another group of men?
Also zur gleichen Zeit, was passiert eben mit dieser anderen Gruppe von Männern?
They get slain, right?
Oder? Kannst du die Heizung ausdrehen? Also sie werden geschlagen.
It says, And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was astonished and rose up in haste. So when he throws them in there, he sees them being delivered right there, right?
Also wenn sie in dieses Feuer geworfen wird, dann sieht eben Nebukadnezar auch, wie sie dann errettet werden.
It says, he rose up in haste and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Now go to verse 27.
Jetzt Vers 27.
And the princes and governors and captains and the king's councillors being gathered together saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed. That is a fulfillment of Luke 21, right?
Und dass ihre Haupthaare nicht versenkt waren, das ist ja dann diese Erfüllung von Vers 21.
Right? That's the promise. That's where Christ, when he's speaking, he's taken that promise from this story right here.
Und als Christus eben davon spricht, dann nimmt er eben dieses Versprechen von diesem Vers hier.
Okay, so where they get thrown in the fiery furnace, it's the final review. One class gets slain, they get delivered, right?
Also wenn sie dann in diesen Feuerofen geworfen wurden, dann hat das eben dieses finale Gericht markiert, wo die eine Klasse geschlagen wird und die andere eben errettet wird.
Okay, so we're out of time, but I'll just close with just reading this quote and then we'll close. Just go to CET 111.
Also wir schließen jetzt mit dem Zitat von CET.
We will take this up again tomorrow where we leave off. Right?
Morgen werden wir da weitermachen.
It says, December 16th, 1848, the Lord gave me a view of the shaking of the powers of the heavens. This is what we're talking about in Luke 21, right?
Also die Erschütterung der Himmel, das ist eben das, worüber wir gesprochen haben in Lukas 21.
I saw that when the Lord said heaven, in giving the signs recorded by Matthew, Mark and Luke, he meant heaven. And when he said earth, he meant earth. The powers of heaven are the sun, moon and stars. They rule in the heavens. The powers of earth are those that rule on the earth. The powers of heaven will be shaken at the voice of God. Then the sun, moon and stars will be moved out of their places. They will not pass away but be shaken by the voice of God. So, what causes the sun, the moon and stars to fall?
Also was verursacht, dass diese Sonne, Mond und Sterne eben fallen?
The voice of God, right?
Stimme Gottes.
Dark, heavy clouds came up and clashed against each other. The atmosphere parted and rolled back. Then we could look up through the open space in Orion, whence came the voice of God. So when did the clouds open in Orion? What's it marking?
Also wann hat sich diese Wolke geöffnet?
The Christ coming down, right?
Wenn Christus herunterkommt.
The holy city will come down through that open space. I saw that the powers of earth are now being shaken, that events come in order, wars, rumours of war, sword, famine, pestilence are the first to shake the powers of the earth. Then the voice of God will shake the sun, moon and stars and this earth also. This is the sign that they were asking for on the Mount of Olives, right?
Also das ist ja dieses Zeichen, was die Jünger eben erfragt haben auf dem Berg.
Right? Real easy to see. This is the sign that they wanted to know when's the second coming of Christ, when's the sun, the moon and the stars going to shake. But he says the earth's got to shake first.
Also das ist das, was sie ja gefragt haben. Wann ist dieses zweite Kommen, also diese Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde. Aber er hat ihnen gesagt, zuerst muss eben die Erschütterung der Erde stattfinden.
Right? Now, just go to Luke 21:25.
Jetzt gehen wir zu Lukas 21 und Vers 25.
And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear. What's happening?
Und was passiert da?
Their hearts are melting. Christ has come on the cloud, right?
Also diese Herzen, sie schmelzen. Also Christus kommt.
And for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. Then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the cloud. So when the heavens and the earth shake, that's when Christ is coming on that cloud, right?
Also wenn eben diese Himmel und Erde erschüttert werden, dann ist es, wenn Christus kommt in den Wolken.
And when these things begin to come to pass, then lift up and look up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. That's where you get delivered, right?
Also das ist, wo du befreit wirst.
Okay. So many other things we've got to go over again, make sure that we understand correctly. But everybody follow at least the principles here, that the shaking of the heavens and earth, according at least to what we've looked at so far this morning, is marking the point where you get delivered.
Also es gibt noch viele Dinge, durch die wir eben durchgehen müssen und die wir uns anschauen müssen, aber konnte jeder folgen, dass eben die Erschütterung der Himmel und der Erde den Punkt markiert, wo Christus wiederkommt,
Right?
Wo wir befreit werden.
wo wir befreit werden.
Okay, so many other things have to be considered, right? So we will take this up from this point tomorrow.
Also wir werden dann morgen da fortfahren.
Okay, sorry that we went so late, but let's close in prayer.
Schließen wir den Gebet.
Dear Father,
Unser himmlischer Vater,
we thank you for this new day,
wir danken dir für diesen neuen Tag,
for this preparation day.
für diesen Risstag.
Pray that you help us to prepare especially our hearts,
Bitte hilf uns, dass wir vorbereitet werden, besonders unsere Herzen,
and that we can enter into your rest and receive the blessing you promised.
dass wir in diese Ruhe eingehen können, diese Segnungen erhalten können, die du verheißt.
Pray that you help us as we endeavor to understand the things that are laid out in the Word,
Bitte hilf uns, dass wir verstehen können die Dinge aus deinem Wort
and that we are firm and established in the truth,
und dass wir eben gegründet sind in der Wahrheit
and especially believe the promises that are written in there.
und eben dann glauben können den Verheißungen, die da drin stehen.
Thank you that promise that you will come and deliver us through your voice.
Danke für die Verheißung, dass du uns retten wirst mit deiner Stimme.
So please help us to fulfill all the conditions so that this voice is not a condemnation upon us but a blessing.
Und bitte hilf uns, dass wir eben all diese Voraussetzungen erfüllen, dass uns diese Stimme retten kann.
Pray that you be now with us during this day and bless us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Und bitte sei jetzt mit uns an diesem Tag und segne uns in Jesu Namen. Amen.